The first time Jonathan Hayes watched the security footage, he nearly dropped the crystal glass in his hand. His paralyzed twin sister, who had not smiled in almost 3 years, was laughing. Not because of expensive therapy, not because of the country's best doctors, not because of the millions of dollars he had spent searching for a miracle. She was laughing because the quiet housemaid everyone ignored was crawling across the polished hardwood floor pretending to be a clumsy turtle just to make her smile. Jonathan stared at the monitor in complete disbelief. But that was only the beginning. What the cameras captured over the next few weeks would expose a heartbreaking truth about love, sacrifice, and humanity that money could never buy. Before we begin, if you believe kindness can change lives and that every person deserves a second chance, please like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue bringing emotional stories that inspire millions around the world. Jonathan Hayes was one of the youngest billionaires in America. At only 39 years old, he owned one of the largest technology companies in Seattle, Washington. Business magazines praised his intelligence, television hosts admired his discipline, and investors trusted every decision he made. To the world, Jonathan appeared unstoppable. His private jet crossed the country every week. His luxury penthouse overlooked the city skyline. His calendar was booked months in advance. But every evening, regardless of where he had been, he returned to the enormous family mansion carrying a sadness no amount of wealth could erase. His identical twin sister, Grace Hayes, had once been the brightest light in his life. Growing up, they had shared every birthday, every dream, and every challenge together. Grace had become a talented elementary school teacher whose laughter filled every room she entered. Everything changed on a rainy autumn evening. A distracted truck driver ignored a red light and crashed directly into Grace's vehicle. She survived, but the accident left her paralyzed from the waist down and severely traumatized. Months of surgeries saved her life, yet they could not restore the woman she had once been. Grace stopped speaking. She barely ate. She rejected every physical therapist. She refused visitors and stared silently through the bedroom window day after day. Jonathan blamed himself. He had asked her to attend a charity dinner that night. If he had never invited her, she would never have been on that road. The guilt consumed him. He hired the finest neurologists from Boston, rehabilitation specialists from California, and psychologists from New York. Every expert promised hope before quietly admitting there was little more they could do. Eventually, Jonathan began losing trust in everyone entering the mansion. Caretakers stayed only for their salaries. Nurses completed their shifts with mechanical precision. Some secretly complained about Grace's silence. Others spent more time looking at their phones than caring for her. Heartbroken and suspicious, Jonathan secretly installed cameras throughout the common areas and Grace's therapy room, not to invade her privacy, but to ensure every caregiver treated her with dignity whenever he traveled for work. Several weeks later, the employment agency recommended a new housemaid. Her name was Ruth Carter. She was a middle-aged African-American widow from Atlanta who had recently moved to Washington after losing her husband to cancer. She had no impressive resume. She spoke softly. Her clothes were simple. Her references described her with only one recurring word: kind. Jonathan almost rejected the application. His estate manager convinced him to give her 1 month. Ruth accepted the position with quiet gratitude and immediately began working without seeking attention. She cleaned carefully. She cooked homemade meals instead of ordering expensive catering. She greeted every employee with respect. Most importantly, she never forced Grace to speak. Jonathan barely noticed her until he watched the footage. Every afternoon, after finishing her duties, Ruth quietly wheeled Grace into the sunroom, where warm sunlight spilled across the wooden floor. Instead of talking endlessly, Ruth simply sat beside her. Sometimes she read children's books aloud. Sometimes she sang old church hymns with a gentle voice that echoed through the quiet house. Sometimes she simply held Grace's hand while saying nothing at all. There were no cameras nearby to impress anyone. No audience. No reward. Only genuine compassion. Day after day, Jonathan watched in amazement as tiny changes appeared. Grace's eyes followed Ruth across the room. A week later, she accepted food from Ruth's hands without hesitation. Another week passed. Grace smiled. Jonathan replayed that moment dozens of times. He had almost forgotten what his sister looked like when she smiled. Yet Ruth never claimed credit. She never asked for recognition. She simply continued loving another human being as though kindness itself was enough. One evening, Jonathan returned home unexpectedly. He entered the sunroom quietly and froze. Grace was attempting to move her wheelchair toward a table where Ruth had placed flower seeds. With trembling hands, Ruth encouraged her to plant them in small pots by the window. Grace's fingers barely cooperated. Several seeds fell onto the floor. Instead of correcting her, Ruth smiled warmly and gathered every seed with patient care, celebrating each tiny success as though Grace had climbed a mountain. Jonathan felt tears burning behind his eyes. For years, he had measured progress through expensive medical reports. Ruth measured progress through hope. Curious, Jonathan asked the estate manager to investigate Ruth's background. The report surprised everyone. Years earlier, Ruth's own daughter, Abigail, had been diagnosed with a rare neurological illness. Insurance refused to cover many treatments, and Ruth worked 3 jobs while caring for her child. Despite every sacrifice, Abigail passed away at 16. Neighbors remembered Ruth visiting children's hospitals every Christmas long after losing her daughter. She said helping another hurting child made her feel closer to Abigail. Jonathan finally understood. Ruth wasn't serving Grace because it was her job. She was healing a piece of her own broken heart. The following month brought another miracle. One afternoon, security cameras captured Grace whispering her first words since the accident. Only 2 simple words. "Thank you." Ruth immediately burst into tears. Not dramatic tears. Quiet tears filled with relief and gratitude. Jonathan watched the footage alone in his office and cried harder than he had since childhood. His sister had found her voice again. Not through medicine, through unconditional love. As Grace slowly improved, Jonathan noticed something else. Other employees began changing too. The gardener started bringing fresh flowers every Monday. The chef learned Grace's favorite childhood recipes. Even the security guards greeted her with genuine warmth. Kindness, like light, had spread throughout the mansion. Months later, Grace insisted on attending physical therapy again. The sessions were exhausting. There were painful setbacks. Some days she wanted to quit. Whenever discouragement appeared, Ruth reminded her not to measure life by how far she still had to go, but by how far she had already come. Nearly a year after Ruth arrived, Grace stood for 7 seconds using parallel bars. 7 seconds. Doctors applauded. Jonathan cried openly. Grace smiled proudly toward Ruth before anyone else. The greatest surprise came during Jonathan's annual charity gala. Business leaders expected another speech celebrating innovation and financial success. Instead, Jonathan walked onto the stage holding a small notebook. He admitted that despite building billion-dollar companies, he had failed to understand what truly changes people's lives. He spoke about watching security footage intended to expose neglect, but instead discovering extraordinary compassion. Then he invited Ruth Carter onto the stage. The ballroom erupted in confusion. Ruth looked terrified as hundreds of wealthy guests stood silently watching. Jonathan handed her the microphone and simply thanked her. He explained that she had accomplished what millions of dollars never could. She had given his sister hope. He announced the creation of the Abigail Carter Foundation in honor of Ruth's late daughter, dedicating $100 million to support families caring for loved ones with disabilities and neurological conditions throughout the United States. The room exploded into applause. Many guests wiped away tears. Reporters expected Ruth to deliver a grand speech. Instead, she quietly said that every person deserves to be treated like family, especially when life becomes difficult. Those simple words became headlines across the nation. Within months, the foundation funded rehabilitation centers, caregiver training programs, adaptive equipment, and scholarships for children living with disabilities. Thousands of families found help because one ordinary woman chose compassion over convenience. Grace never fully recovered. She still depended on her wheelchair most days. But she laughed again. She painted beautiful landscapes. She began mentoring newly injured patients through online support groups. Most importantly, she believed tomorrow was worth living for. Jonathan often admitted that installing those cameras became the greatest decision of his life. He had expected to uncover dishonesty. Instead, he discovered the quiet power of genuine love. Years later, Visitors entering the Hayes mansion always noticed one framed photograph displayed in the entrance hall. It wasn't Jonathan receiving a business award. It wasn't a magazine cover. It wasn't even a family portrait. It showed Grace smiling beside Ruth while planting flowers beneath the morning sun. Below the photograph rested a simple, engraved message. The greatest miracles are performed not by wealth, but by hearts that choose kindness every single day. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, subscribe to the channel, and let us know your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps these inspiring stories reach more people. Speech balloon special request. Before you leave, comment with the words, "Kindness changes everything." You never know who might read your message and find the strength to keep going. Sometimes the richest person in the room is not the one with the biggest bank account, but the one whose heart never stops caring. And sometimes, the miracle we've been searching for all along is simply one compassionate soul willing to love another without expecting anything in return.